Doesn't matter how good of an idea you have, ultimately, if you don't have public acceptance and understanding, no company will succeed in that environment. Oceans are dark and mysterious in many ways. Most of us see as sort of a landscape feature, but there are active biological processes, chemistry, and unfortunately, it happens to be that people don't generally understand the processes that go on. The population, as we all know, is growing, and there is an understanding that we need to find new sources of protein. Right now, the literature is solid behind the sustainability of seafood, particularly aquaculture. Finfish is the best on the planet right now in terms of amount of greenhouse gas, carbon footprint, and protein output. So without a doubt, this is the best approach to go. In terms of options in front, terrestrial systems are tapped out. So we do need to look at the oceans as another reservoir and opportunity to grow what is now a continually growing population.
I was involved in the commercial fishery when I got into school for 4 or 5 years. I went lobster fishing, sword fishing, and tuna fishing. And then I saw a video on TV showing about this new thing called salmon farming, which I thought was pretty cool. Thought it was the way of the future, so I started to educate myself a bit about that. And then along about 1993, a partner and myself applied for an aquaculture lease in Nova Scotia. It was actually the Rattling Beach lease. So we started that in 93, and I've spent my entire career involved in aquaculture here in Nova Scotia.
So there actually isn't an Atlantic salmon commercial fishery in this area anymore. Maine quit theirs in 1948. The Maritimes and Quebec ended their commercial fishery in 1973, and Newfoundland followed suit in 1979. Aquaculture started in the Maritimes in the 1970s. Originally, the stock was surplus from the Department of Fisheries and Oceans restocking and conservation programs. The farms were able to grow the fish, and then as part of that growth, as part of that industry, we took pressure off the wild stocks because now people didn't have to go to the rivers and catch salmon. They didn't have to poach salmon because they were readily available to them in the market.
Atlantic salmon start their life cycle in fresh water, migrate to saltwater as adults, and return once more to fresh water to spawn. Here on the east coast of Canada in the United States, Atlantic salmon spawn in the fall in rivers where they bury their eggs in the riverbed. These eggs hatch in the spring, and at this point, they are called alevins. The alevins stay in the gravel and have a yolk sac attached which they feed off of. Once the yolk sac is absorbed, they develop into fry and come out of the gravel where they are first hatched. Near the end of the first year, they develop dark marks on their sides and are now called parr. They remain as parr until their 3rd or 4th year, at which point they go through a change called smoltification that prepares them for living in salt water. The smolt will swim out to sea in late spring, early summer.
So farmed Atlantic salmon is actually very similar to wild Atlantic salmon life cycles. The only difference is that a farmed salmon is given multiple opportunities to grow. So we give them lots of food and we give them good water quality environment to grow in. We have a broodstock facility on land and fresh water. We remove the eggs from the broodstock in the fall, winter, and then those eggs will hatch, and the same, they'll have that yolk sac, they'll feed off of that yolk sac, and when that yolk sac is depleted, instead of the fry having to go and search for their feed, we offer that to them. And that enables them to grow a little faster. And then they'll go through the same process. They will become parr and they will become smolt. And then in that spring, summer, when they would normally go to sea in the wild, we will actually ship our fish out to the marine environment.
Breeding salmon is very much the same as breeding other animals, whether it be pets or animals for food production. Once fish are born, we keep track of their parents, the broodstock, and watch how the children grow. We identify which fish are the healthiest and select only the best performers to breed again. By carefully tracing the strain of fish that are the healthiest and only breeding those families, we have seen significant improvements in the overall health and longevity of the fish.
What we have here in Cooke is a family-based breeding program. It's very similar to animal breeding programs with other species. The strain that we use here is the St. John River Aquaculture strain, which was selected from the St. John River many years ago and is better able to survive and perform in the conditions that we face here on the East Coast. It was about 20 years ago that we decided we needed to better manage our brood stock and our egg supply to make ourselves more sustainable. Over those 20 years, those 5 generations, we've seen improvements in growth, improvements in flesh quality, which would include fillet yield, colour, and we've seen a much improved resistance to most of the common diseases that we face in this area.
Genomics is the study of genes and their functions at the molecular level. Scientists look at how genetics and environmental factors contribute to growth and overall health. It does not involve changing the genes or DNA in any way. In aquaculture, genomics helps us better understand which fish will perform better in our environment and which fish are more disease resistant based on their DNA. This helps us choose which families of fish are best for breeding.
We've moved into the area of genomics to develop tools which allowed us to analyze the DNA of particular individual fish using the biological barcode that every animal carries. We can take a fin clip from our animals, we run it through these tools to better identify fish, and we can use it as the ultimate way of traceability, so that we have a DNA fingerprint which allows us to have traceability from egg to plate.
When we survey an area for potential new sites, the methods that we've used have changed a lot over the years. What we did traditionally is we would find an area that was not lobster fish intensively, that had the right water depth, and we would apply for that area. As the industry's progressed, we've added a lot more science into that process. We collect a lot of oceanographic data, wind data, wave data, current data, water depths, water chemistry. Then we do a lot of modeling with that so that we can predict potential impacts on fish health, potential impacts on the Benthic community, and the health and safety of our farm with our equipment. We can do modeling to ensure that the moorings and different equipment are the right moorings and equipment for that particular site.
We prepare under the worst conditions possible through 50-year weather plans. We work with Environment Canada, Coast Guard, Transport Canada, weather stations to collect that data to help us understand the conditions that are happening and where they might happen next.
Part of every production cycle in Nova Scotia involves third-party monitoring of the environment around, below, and above the salmon farm, both before the cycle begins, before salmon are introduced to the farm, but also at what's called peak biomass, when the maximum amount of fish is on the farm. So they do video work, bottom samples to check the condition of the bottom, both under the farm and also in the surrounding area.
We essentially go out to all of the marine finfish sites here in the province and collect sediment samples from cage edge. We're essentially looking for sulfides and organic enrichment to see if the benthic environment is being affected by the farm activities. Our grabs that we deploy over the boat, which are triggered when they hit the seafloor, they have to come up with overlaying water. They need to be at least 5 centimeters of sediment depth. They have to look relatively undisturbed so that we can tell that there's been no real disturbance or flushing of water through the sediment that may have removed any of the sulfides and other analysis that we're looking to measure. All the data that we collect on behalf of our clients in the industry is fed directly from us to the government regulators, both with the Nova Scotia Department of Fisheries and Aquaculture here in Nova Scotia, and also to the aquaculture activities regulations, which are mandated by Fisheries and Oceans Canada.
So we have over 50 sites operating in Atlantic Canada at any one time. A lot of these sites have been operating for over 30 years. So if you stop and think about the amount of data that we've collected, it's very astronomical, really. And what that allows us to do is be able to use this data to better predict what will happen on our farms. 2013, the province of Nova Scotia commissioned the Dole Leahy report to completely review the regulations for the aquaculture industry. One of the good things with the regulatory changes is now we have a process where we start talking with the community early on. We take advice from the community and we build that into our plan. And everybody is informed of the operations as we go along. In a lot of the areas now, we are setting up community liaison committees. We invite members of the community to sit on that committee so that we can learn from them and the different sectors of the community.
We, as the Digby Harbour Port Authority, have been asked to sit on that committee. We look forward to sitting with other members of the community and telling our story and relaying some of our experiences and see what other people have to say.
We have made significant improvements over the years in the infrastructure we use. We take great care to ensure every piece of equipment is tested and certified for use, as well as tracked and replaced appropriately.
We put in all of the forces that the site is going to withstand, and it goes through a numerical modeling that would react to the fatigue state, the normal state, and the storm state. And with that comes a breaking strength or a load factor that's assigned to it. That helps us verify if the safety factor is met, and the safety factor is usually 5 to 1. We track the individual components and the assets from cradle to grave. If we do any type of replacement, we would remove that and then add in another component and begin to trace it all over again. We do the same thing on our cages. We tag everyone. There's a life cycle from when it was built, who built it, when it was built. We look at how we repair the nets and where we repair the nets, and we record the breaking strength to make sure that it's maintained at a proper breaking strength. And also we do testing in our lab on the fibers themselves. When the nets come in for repair, we would take those nets and take patches off of them and test them to be able to forward trend to make sure that the products will last in the water. So once we finish up the modeling, we would then have a plan to work from, and we would begin to position the anchors in the ocean, and then we would attach our mooring blocks, our mooring chain, our mooring rope up through our grid plates, which would secure each of the cells in a grid format, and then our cages are attached to those grids through bridles. So everything is adjusted, is tensioned, and is in position to withstand the forces that Mother Nature throws at us. We're constantly looking at ways and how we can improve our equipment, that we can run greener, more responsibly, more efficiently. We have focus groups inside of our operations that specifically would focus on doing inspections and audits on the sites to make sure that the setup is properly done. We've also added an engineering group. We have 5 engineers on staff with a mix of disciplines that they bring. We have a workforce that has been around for a long period of time, and they want to continue to farm, and this is their livelihood, and we want to make sure that we continue this through the future generations.
When it comes time to transport them from the hatcheries to the salmon sites, they're seine decked in the tanks, in the hatcheries, transported on a truck to the nearest wharf, and then usually loaded onto a transportation vessel, which will then steam out to our sea cage site like we have out here, and then move into the cages that we have. This farm is particularly good. It has good oxygen, good water temperature levels, excellent tidal flow, which are all great factors in growing a beautiful, healthy salmon.
Typical day, well, it's hard to nail down a typical day. That's part of what I love about this job. You're out here every day on the farm. Any issues that arise and maintenance of your feed systems, care of your fish. There's always something to do on a farm, and it's always a little different, so it's nice, it keeps life interesting.
They also do a weekly surface inspection over all of our cages, everything above the water column. So cages, the nets, buoys, bridles, all the pieces of equipment on the farm. So they'll go over everything, see if there's anything that needs to be upgraded, maintained, changed in any nature, and they'll send that in. And they also do a monthly safety inspection as well.
about 80% of the site's underwater, so a lot of people don't really realize that most of the action happens under the surface.
Once a week, we got to check every cage. This is Rattling Beach, and there's 20 cages here, and we have to go in under provincial regulation to make sure there's nothing in the cage and any damage. There could be seals or anything like that. We have to do bottom videos once a month just to make sure that the bottom's clear. All the anchor work, we do grid inspections, swim the entire grid, video them, send them all in, go over all the rope, make sure there's no chafe marks, net condition, and fish activity, make sure there's no problems with any of the fish. Usually with remote feeding, if they see anything wrong with the cages, they'll give us a call. We come in and make sure the fish activity is good, make sure there's a good school, check condition, and make sure there's nothing wrong in the cages. We usually I have a 5-man team. Instead of one diver in the cage, we put 2 in, and that way there's more eyes on anything. If there's anything wrong in the cage, we can be tethered to the surface or tethered to each other, and that way there we can keep in constant communication the whole time.
Traditionally, we would use a copper-based antifouling on the nets. We haven't used that in Nova Scotia for about 6 years. We've invested a lot of money in remote operated vehicles which go and they wash the organic growth off of the nets, and we do that about every 12 days. That ensures we have pristine conditions in our cages. We're not washing heavy organics and going near the bottom, and it eliminates the need for any heavy metals being put into the water.
Over the last few years, we've introduced Sapphire Net, which has a stainless steel core, so it gives improved strength and structural integrity to those nets. The new Sapphire netting holds its shape much better than the previous styles of nylon netting, which makes it a lot easier for these remote operated net cleaners to operate. At the end of every cycle, after 16 to 18 months, our salmon are grown up to 10 to 12 pounds minimum in size. Once you get to the harvest stage, we have our harvest vessels come out to the farm. The site crew will seine up a small volume of fish. Harvest vessel will put in a pumping apparatus. The fish will be withdrawn from the pump, go up onto the harvest vessel through a dewatering table. They're euthanized by a pneumatic stunning device, and then they're put into a super chill water solution, which lowers the core temperature of those fish. Once they have a full load, which can be anywhere between 8,000 and 25,000 fish of a 10-pound average, they'll either offload at a wharf, the fish will be put into a tanker truck, or the vessel may sail directly to our processing plant.
We grow some of the best fish that we can grow. This site here has won the awards for this, and we take great pride in the product that we put out and the product that we grow here.
No standards are higher than the ones we set for ourselves. Over the years, we have grown into a fully integrated Atlantic salmon producer, which means that every salmon is traceable back to the egg. This vertical integration is the key to meeting the rigorous quality and sustainability standards set by certifications such as BRCGS for food safety and Best Aquaculture Practices, known as BAP.
So as a global company, we subscribe to about 15 different types of certifications. Here in North America, we subscribe to about 5. And that covers everything from our wild and farmed, all of our marine farms, processing plants, feed mills, hatcheries, cold storage, and our own seafood distributor, AC Cove and Dartmouth, Nova Scotia.
We have achieved the highest level of BAP certification, which is 4 stars. 1 star for each of the following links in the production chain: processing plants, sea sites, freshwater hatcheries, and feed mills.
BAP is built on 4 pillars of sustainability. They have environment, social, animal welfare, and food safety. And to build upon the food safety, our processing plants also carry an additional certification, which is the BRCGS Food Safety Standard. Now, both BAP and BRCGS are benchmarked to the Global Food Safety Initiative, or GFSI.
BAP has a human component as well. It's not just numbers, it's not just dollars, it's how the employees are treated, it's the conditions that they're working under, it's the process that we follow, and it's proving that we follow the standards that we have in place that comply with the certification.
Here in North America, my team consists of 3 people that are 100% focused on certification. But we are just really a support team for the individuals, the facilities, the facility managers, and the divisions as a whole, because they are the real people that do the work to get this certification done. Globally, as a company, we kind of replicate that format. There's a small central core team that's focused on certification and that assists a larger group of people. We conduct about 100 audits each year. In addition to that, the facilities also go through other audits and inspections, self-audits, self-inspections, external audits, regulatory audits from CFIA and FDA, as well as any customer audits.
Good nutrition is one of the most important factors in maintaining healthy fish. So much so that we established our own feed company, Northeast Nutrition Incorporated, in 2007, which owns and operates a feed mill in Truro, Nova Scotia, employing over 50 people. We also conduct our own research and development and testing programs to continually assess the development of our fish at every stage of their life cycle and use that information to improve our feed recipes.
All the ingredients are approved by the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. There's a schedule that lists what ingredients are approved, and it can even go as specific as what the inclusion level can be in diets for animals, whether it's Atlantic salmon, poultry, beef, pork. It's all based in the same federal agency.
We are audited each year by the Canadian Food Inspection Agency to ensure we are compliant with the Canadian federal regulations on the ingredients we use as well as our manufacturing processes. We also have a HACCP certification conducted each year. HACCP certification is an international standard defining the requirements for effective control of food safety and demonstrates to customers your commitment to producing or trading in safe food. The Truro Feed Manufacturing Mill is also BAP Best Aquaculture Practices certified. BAP is the only seafood-specific third-party certification program that ensures every step in the aquaculture production chain is done responsibly from egg to plate. Feed conversion is a way of measuring how much feed it takes to produce the final meat for market. This is an important measurement when considering sustainability of a particular animal. Aquaculture has some of the best feed conversion ratios when compared to other farmed animals. Salmon need fewer calories than mammals to live and grow in the ocean. They have a swim bladder that allows them to maintain neutral buoyancy as they move through the water. Because of this, they don't feel the effects of gravity and do not have to expend the same amount of energy to stand up or walk that mammals do. As cold-blooded animals, they also do not need to expend energy maintaining a regular body temperature.
With Atlantic salmon, a 1.2 is what I feel would be a very strong conversion ratio. That means that if I were to give an animal 1.2 kilograms of feed, I would expect a 1 kilogram growth on that animal from that consumption. We strive for that in our production, and we are able to achieve that at some sites. Some could be a little greater if they're in longer than what we plan. When you consume at that efficient level, what it's saying is that most of that is going into building the body. There would be a very small amount that would be coming out as fecal matter. So you are maximizing the efficiency and you are minimizing the impact on the environment. To compare that with poultry, it would be approximately a 1.6 versus the salmon at 1.2. When it comes to pork, it would be 3 roughly, and for beef it could be as high as 8 to 9 units of food in to get the 1 unit of growth from that.
In nature, salmon are one of a few animals that get the color in their flesh from eating carotenoids that come from algae further down the food chain. These carotenoids are what give the salmon their bright orange flesh. We include carotenoids in their diet to get that same coloring in farmed salmon. We do not add dyes to our salmon.
In the early days of Atlantic salmon farming, there was a high dependency at that time for wild fish. The ratio of wild fish in for Atlantic salmon production out was much greater than 1 to 1 because that's what the animals were eating in nature as carnivores. What would have been 10 to 1 years ago is actually less than 1 now when you consider we're creating seafood proteins from other ingredient sources, and when we harvest that animal and we have byproducts that can be used in other industries such as pet food, when you do the follow-through, it's about 0.7 to 1.
It is very important that we manage how much feed is used when feeding our fish. If more feed is released than what the fish will consume, it will fall to the bottom and start composting. This composting process requires oxygen, and if too much feed falls to the bottom, the composting process can have a negative impact on other plants and sea life in the immediate area. Feed is the highest cost of production in salmon aquaculture. Not only do we need to care for the environment, but we must also carefully control how much feed is used to manage our costs. We monitor water quality, including temperature, oxygen, and other factors to optimize fish growth and reduce stress. By feeding when the environmental conditions are right, the fish are able to consume the correct amount of feed, reducing waste that falls to the bottom. We have made huge improvements in this area over the past 20 years, and we have teams that are solely focused on tracking this information and learning from what we have seen in the past, and applying that learning into new processes and technology. We have close partnerships with universities and other industry players to continually develop new ways of improving our processes.
We have our fish health teams that visit the sites monthly to make certain that things are well. We have weight sampling technicians that visit the sites from April through December to make certain that things are performing well in terms of the feed and the growth in the biomass that's occurred in result. We track that very closely. By knowing how much biomass is in our enclosures at each one on the sites, we're able to understand how much they should consume based on the water temperature they're in. So I watch that closely. That's my job. I have a team of specialists I work with, and if we happen to see a site that may be going beyond what we feel is the appropriate amount of feed, we follow up immediately. At the end of the day, we're watching to make certain that across all of our sites, we're giving equal opportunity, appropriate amounts of feed. We're not overfeeding, because if we overfeed, first and foremost, it will impact our environmental conditions where we farm. And we don't want that, because then it jeopardizes our animals and it can jeopardize our future. The second reason we do not want to overfeed is because it's a missed opportunity. We've created this beautiful, highly digestible diet, and to have that go through the enclosure and end up on the ocean floor would not be good. It's our greatest cost of production, and we certainly don't want to be inefficient in how we feed. So we look very closely at how much we're feeding, when we feed, animal health, environmental conditions.
Another huge step forward in our continued efforts to improve the sustainability of our farm practices was the introduction of underwater cameras. We now have cameras both underwater and above water at all of our sites, and a staffed remote feed station in Bridgewater to oversee our operations at sites with central feeding stations.
When we first started out in this industry, we would throw feed in by hand. We wasted feed, it wasn't very efficient, and we progressed to where we are today. We're standing beside a large feed system. Every cage in Nova Scotia that we have has a camera in it, so that it's monitored. We feed the fish the right amount of feed, when they want the feed, and how they want the feed. That's just one small example of how technology has developed. If we look back 5 years ago to where we are now, it's truly unbelievable.
Well, to have eyes underneath the water, in the past before underwater cameras were used, only scuba divers that we would have on site doing maintenance would actually get to see the animals. So when we fed, it would have just been at the surface, and it's like only seeing a very small volume of what's in the enclosure. So with the underwater cameras in use, we'll go down through the cage system about 2/3 of the depth of the enclosure, and we look back up through the school of fish that's above. And by watching that school of fish, where they're placed and what they're doing in response during feeding, we know how they're eating and we know how much to give them.
So they're able to slow down and stop the feed rates before any overfeed happens. So by watching the behavior of the fish, they're able to anticipate when they've reached satiation. So no feed is wasted on the farm.
With the cameras in the water, you're looking for behavior of the fish, how they're schooling, how they're responding to the feed, whether to increase or decrease the amount of feed going in the cage. All the remote feeders have access to the temperature, oxygen in real time, so they're seeing it every 5 minutes. It's being updated, and we have limits set. If the oxygen is too low, we will stop feeding so we do not harm the fish. Temperature is too low, same thing, we will not feed. We have guidelines. We now have the technology where with a camera we can get the length and measure of the fish, which gives us a weight. And so we're not handling the fish, we're moving slime, we're moving scale, so it's
all around healthier for the fish. The remote feeders are almost becoming specialists in it, where they're constantly feeding, they know the fish, and there's no worry about going in and out to the farm on bad weather days. So once you miss a day on the farm, you cannot get that growth back. So as of now, we're actually getting better growth on the fish.
We have a dedicated fish health team that are focused on all of our fish, from hatchery to sea sites. Our farmers perform daily checks on the conditions of the fish and the environment, and we have members of our fish health team that do regular on-site visits.
So we have 5 veterinarians and 4 support staff, fish health technicians, and 1 medical laboratory technologist. And there wouldn't be a day that goes by that one of the fish health staff aren't on the water. We do a lot of disease screening. We screen for diseases that we don't have so that we can pick them up early. And then we do screening all the time for things that we know we have at a low level to catch it before it gets to an increased level.
A lot of the screening we do is done at the molecular level, where we look for the presence of genetic material, which can be referred to as PCR testing. We are watching for diseases that are endemic, which means we have seen them before, as well as new diseases, so that we can deal with them before they become a problem.
In the past, there was less testing. So a facility only needed to test twice a year to be able to be compliant with regulation to be able to stock. And then over time, we started to check the farms monthly. Even though that's not required from a regulatory perspective, we still do that so that we know that we're not shipping out any unhealthy animals. Early years of farming, we just mostly had bacterial pathogens that we had no vaccines for, and then over the years we got vaccines produced against a lot of our endemic diseases that we don't really see anymore at all because of the vaccination. We vaccinate the animals when they're really small on land, so they get dip vaccinations when they're just tiny, and when they get big enough, they actually each animal gets a needle of vaccine, just like you would your animal if you took them to the vet. Since the vaccination is given at the hatchery when the animal is 50 grams, for example, and they're harvested at 6 kilos 3 years later, we're very confident that there's no vaccine in the animals that we sell. Generally speaking, vaccines are totally different than antibiotics. So vaccines are something you deliver to the animal, typically in needle form, that prevents a disease so you don't have to rely on antibiotics.
Regarding antibiotics in farming, there are times when they're needed. We try to avoid that by using healthy, digestible food. We have continuous research in our broodstock development in terms of the family lines that we use. Also, we use vaccines to promote animal health and to maintain strong animal health so that the requirement for antibiotics is minimized. In our farming practices, it is very low, the incidence that we would require antibiotics. When they are required, they're only used under a prescription that's issued by a licensed veterinarian. So there are no prophylactic treatments conducted with antibiotics. It would be no different than if a child were to become ill and require an antibiotic prescription from a doctor. That's how we treat our animals. If an antibiotic treatment is conducted at a site, there is a withdrawal period after the treatment that would have to be realized before the animals could be considered for harvest. We do residue sampling in the flesh to confirm there are no antibiotics remaining. That's all listed under Health Canada and Canadian Food Inspection Agency.
There is a huge worldwide push to decrease antibiotic use in any type of farming, because farmed animals in Canada, for example, account for 75% or more of antibiotic use. So we're trying to decrease that. All veterinarians are working to decrease that, and it's a national, it's an international effort across all jurisdictions. There are many farming areas that we use no antibiotics. For example, in Maine, we were 13 years. We had absolutely no antibiotic use, and then a few years, a tiny bit, and then we're back to 0 again. When we first started farming in this area, we had multi-year class farms, basically. So you would have multiple generations on one farm. And we learned over time that we needed to do more like terrestrial farming, which is all in, all out. So you put all your animals in one area and you harvest them all out at the same time. And this has a huge impact on the prevention of disease. Other biosecurity measures would be, cleaning and disinfecting our vessels, any kind of equipment that gets transferred so it doesn't move between bay management areas. When the animals are slaughtered, they have to be bled out like every animal has to be. And all that blood water gets contained in the vessel, and the vessel is taken to the plant, and it all goes into the plant to be cleaned and disinfected properly. Containing all our blood water was a huge step forward, and that was done by Cooke really early, way before any other farming companies in the area. We don't use growth promotants, so we don't use in-feed medication that promotes growth, and we don't use any growth hormones that promote accelerated growth.
In addition to having our own research and development department, we have forged many relationships with universities and other research companies within the industry and government. Our work with Dr. John Grant of Dalhousie University is a great example of industry working with academia to find more sustainable ways of operating.
So our work is directed at what we call decision support. So enabling others, such as regulators, fish farming industry, NGOs, etc., to make decisions with the best science. The overall theme in our research is what's referred to as the ecosystem approach to aquaculture, something conceived of by the United Nations as part of its sustainability program, and it considers the entire ecosystem with respect to aquaculture, not just the locations where farms are sited. We, of course, work closely with a variety of collaborators around the world on fish farming, including the primary fish farming countries such as Scotland, Norway, Chile, because it's really sort of a global incubator in terms of ideas. We work closely with private industry, not just Cooke Aquaculture, but technology companies including InnovaSea and IBM to look at some of the data issues and how we can use computer science to leverage the data which is collected at fish farms. The work we do with InnovaSea on sensors involving temperature and oxygen and the thousands of sensors that Cooke Aquaculture has deployed have really been transformative in fish farming, because now we have an information flow that is unprecedented and we think will lead to much greater versions of sustainability. We're also conducting research to look at predicting these variables several days out, and this would also include the effect of storms and other oceanographic variables in determining oxygen and temperature. We're often considering the scale of the aquaculture activity with respect to the capacity of the ecosystem to either process the nutrients, flush them, etc. And we refer to this as carrying capacity. So one of the analogies I've put forward is to consider a fish cage with a single fish in it. If you propose growing that single fish in a bay, no one would say that's too many fish, it will cause harm. But if we scale that up to 2 fish, then 10 fish, 10 hundreds and thousands of fish, then there is a point at which we might consider an imbalance between, for example, nutrient loads such as nitrogen compared to the ability of the ecosystem to receive and process that material. So we've been studying the potential impact of aquaculture on the bottom, which we refer to as the benthos, for about 25 years. We've taken thousands of samples in many locations for shellfish and finfish farms. So one of the big concerns with respect to aquaculture in any form, shellfish, finfish, shrimp, etc., is waste management. So the animals produce feces, they produce what you might refer to as urine, and oftentimes this involves the element nitrogen in different forms. And excess nitrogen in marine ecosystems causes excess blooming of natural material like phytoplankton, and we might switch over to a community that's less dependent on oxygen. This is not a dead zone, because it's not dead. It is just temporarily changed over to another set of conditions. It still has the ability to process organic matter. In coastal bays, we find these areas naturally anyway, but one of the ideas of our work is that this would be contained within the area of the fish farm and not have implications for the larger bay. In general, the areas impacted are tiny compared to the rest of the bay, and the natural processes that we rely on for commercial fisheries are referred to as ecosystem services. And those ecosystem services still exist in the larger bay in spite of any localized impact with aquaculture. However, we use approaches such as bay management area to rotate and fallow certain sites as a farmer would on agricultural fields.
Because we are operating in a common resource, the interactions between salmon farms and other industries that rely on the resource are continually being monitored and studied.
We've looked at the interaction between lobster populations and fish farms, namely an 8-year study on Grand Manan where we sampled lobsters on a fish farm and at some distance away from the farm. And in both cases, those lobster populations increased. They increased in the same way that the fishery has, which is over those many years was something like 150%.
Similar studies to the one in Grand Manan comparing lobster harvest adjacent to sites are being conducted in Liverpool Bay and Shelburne, Nova Scotia.
So we're not seeing any unexpected or certainly no negative trends of lobsters at the fish farm. We've looked at optimal lobster habitat using what are called species distribution models, which reflect the abundance of lobsters with respect to substrate type and depth. And these allow us to predict where optimal locations are for lobsters so that we're able to use this advice for siting fish farms to avoid the interaction altogether. I think it's important to emphasize that Nova Scotia is not just a follower in these kinds of techniques and developments, that really this is the place where so much innovation has occurred. And this is collaborations between companies like Cooke, which are progressive enough to understand the importance of sustainable practice and innovation, as well as supporting that research, and the provincial government, which has also been very proactive from a research agenda, and other partners including DFO, First Nations, etc. So we have a huge concentration of aquaculture researchers in Atlantic Canada.
We do a good job, but we're always looking to improve. What's important with Cooke is that the senior management and the owners of the company particularly are willing to invest in those changes and improvements to do what we do even better.
If we find a piece of equipment or a technology somewhere around the world that is good for our people, good for our fish, and is good for the environment, it's generally a very easy sell to get executive management to make those purchases.
So one of the exciting things coming to Cooke Aquaculture was that I recognized very early there's a research innovation that goes on here and an acceptance of risk associated with research. And some of these are not normal for what a seafood company or necessarily an aquaculture company should or could do. There's a big quantum leap to get into artificial intelligence or genomics research. But these investments were made at a time when it was uncertain about the outcomes. They're paying dividends now, and that boldness is basically what attracted me to Cooke. They're one of the forward-leaning research organizations in the world, and it reflects the size at which they are today. So there's a high level of energy and interest in developing what we're calling precision aquaculture, which is a new space in aquaculture that looks to make better farms of the future. So these farms are ultimately more productive, safer, and a lot of this is done through innovations from existing agricultural spaces.
In Nova Scotia, we have not had to treat for sea lice. However, as a company, we are continually looking for new and better ways of dealing with the parasite that can be found naturally in our waters, so we are ready if they were to show up in our Nova Scotia farms. We have developed a number of programs to raise lumpfish in our salmon enclosures. Lumpfish are indigenous to our waters and eat sea lice. Our initial tests in Newfoundland and New Brunswick have proven to be quite successful. We are also investing in thermal licer technology, which is a way of moving our fish through a warm water shower. The sea lice let go of the fish in the warm water, and the lice are filtered into a bag where they can be removed completely from the environment.
So the mechanical treatments are very good in the fact that the lice that are removed from the fish are filtered, and they never go back in the water. This is a huge step forward. So even if lice were dead, they don't go back into the environment. And in some other treatment modalities from the past, maybe the sea lice would go back into the environment, and we were always questioning, is that lice viable? Can that louse reattach? Can the eggs hatch out and affect the fish again? So with our mechanical treatment boats, the lice are removed by filtering the water.
One important thing that I've noticed in my time in Digby since 1993 is we're now part of the fabric of the community. We're members of the Port Authority. We produce probably 30% of the product that goes over the wharf. We use that wharf 364 days of the year. The only day we don't use it is on Christmas Day. And we see this in other areas that we operate as well. Sometimes there's fear of the unknown. But after we're there, we're operating for a bit of time, people see that maybe some of the things they've heard are not quite true. One thing that we see in Nova Scotia in particular is aquaculture grows in the area, so do the spin-offs. We talk about the direct costs. We don't always talk about the spin-offs. But once we get to a higher level of production, there's an incredible amount of spin-offs. And with our company, we have pretty much every job you can imagine. We have somebody doing that job, from lawyers to accountants and whatnot. But really with our farms, and especially here in Digby, there are a lot of mechanics that do work for us. Welders, home hardware. There's a major shipyard just down the road, and we probably are their largest customer. But it's not just big companies that benefit from aquaculture. In 2018, we spent over $240 million amongst 1,260 companies, local companies across Atlantic Canada, just on goods and services. We not only bring jobs directly on the farm, but there are other opportunities for existing businesses to diversify and also for new entrants in different businesses to create businesses to help service the industry.
Digby has traditionally been a fishing community. The Port of Digby itself is an economic driver in the community. We have Department of Fisheries landings numbers for scallop and lobster for 2016, and when we extrapolate for what we expect is the landings for Cooke Aquaculture, we're talking about $75 million annually into the community. Then when you start looking at the spin-offs into the other service industries, it's a major contributor.
We appreciate the business that Cooke has given us over the years. We do a fair amount of work on their small vessels here in Digby for them. It helps create employment in the area for the people at the shipyard. Cooke's was a significant piece of our business last year through working on their vessels and some other parts and stuff that we supplied for them. And they're good to have in the area, great to work for.
Yeah, I love diving. I've been around it all my life and glad I can do it for a living. I live 20 minutes away from work. I'm home every night with my family.
So we have about 20 people that are employed here on the salmon farms. We're not all working on one site at one time, but when harvest comes around, it's all hands on deck. Everybody gets together. It's the biggest part of our grow out is to harvest them, take them out of the water. And when you see all 20 odd guys together working together, it gives you a scope of just how many guys it takes to run an operation like this. I live about 5 minutes away from the wharf, so it's a quick commute every morning. I grew up in this town. This is where I'm from. I started on the site, worked on the maintenance barges, went through my FM4, got my captain's papers, ran a wash boat, and now I'm running both sites in Digby. So it's been quite a trip and learned a lot. Prior to that, I was working in the construction industry, doing a lot of concrete work. It was seasonal work, it was hard work. And coming to the salmon farms was a huge change for me. It was going from a job to a career that I really loved, and it's been a really great thing for my family and myself.
I'm located in Bridgetown, which is about 30 minutes from here. I've been employed with Cooke now for 13 years. It's full-time work all year round. I've got 2 little girls. It's great.
Atlantic salmon farming has come a long way from its early years. At Cooke Aquaculture, we are constantly investing in research and development, closely watching the impacts of our past and changing and updating our current processes to improve our way forward. Sustainable development will continue to be in the forefront of our strategic growth strategy as a company operating in a fragile and very important marine environment.
It all comes back to a greater understanding of what the risks are and understanding what's normal for that environment. Part of what we're trying to do is make sure that people understand what aquaculture actually is, modern aquaculture, which is applying the best science and technology that's available and pushing the frontier a little bit further beyond that to do better. Aquaculture is one of those very fascinating technologies that can raise seafood, raise protein availability to the general population in a sustainable and manageable way. Nova Scotia is a fantastic environment to do aquaculture. It makes sense. There's every piece of evidence tells me that this is the place that you can do this safely and manage it sustainably. You know, the beauty of the place requires a lot of attention to keep and maintain. The balance between human activity and natural environment is always a struggle, but with good science and planning, there is a balance that can be met. My interest in aquaculture largely stemmed from seeing it as a solution forward towards food sustainability, which has been a passion of mine right from the very beginning. A way to give back to this environment is ultimately making sure that the environment that we're working in stays as good as we found it.